Hey class, this video is a quick introduction to chapter 4 in the textbook, which is on drawing. Now drawing is probably the genesis of art, meaning that the first initial ideas of the artist can be created in drawing because it's very quick, it's very direct, it's a great way to get those first ideas down onto paper. So what you'll see is a lot of artists making drawings to sketch out those ideas, which could then be made as a finished painting or perhaps a finished sculpture, maybe even a work of architecture. It hasn't always been the case that drawing has been seen as an independent, sort of viable media of art. And that term media is important, it just simply means the artist's material. But our attitudes towards drawing have changed in the last several hundred years, so in terms of art history, fairly recently, but you might see drawings today on the walls in a museum next to other paintings or other sculptures. So drawing is basically seen as equivalent today. What I'll do today in this video is to demonstrate how some of the different drawing materials look, how they appear different. The chapter, although very short, is very important, and it breaks down the different drawing media into graphite, charcoal, ink. It just describes how those things, those drawing media, can be different from the other. They not only look different, but they feel different in the hand, and they produce a different style of drawing. So an artist may choose one over another for those specific reasons. The first one I'll start out with is graphite. Here's just a simple graphite pencil. Graphite is sort of a grayish tone. It has that kind of silvery metallic feel to it. You can find graphite pencils which are lighter or darker than others, but one advantage of graphite is that you can erase it. So you can see that I can begin to erase this. Now this particular pencil has a lot of oil in it, and that really attaches or adheres to the paper. So sometimes it is difficult to fully erase graphite, but that's one thing that makes it very versatile, is that you can erase it and you can achieve a wide range of tones with the graphite material. The next one I have here is a piece of charcoal. Now this particular piece of charcoal is called vine charcoal. It feels sort of very brittle in the hands. It feels like I could break this very easily, and sometimes when drawing with this, use enough pressure and it will break off in the hands. But it produces a much different feel and a much different line. Now the texture that you're seeing in the drawing is the texture of the wall behind it. But you can see in comparison here just a difference in tone or in feel of the material. Now charcoal can almost easily be erased with the hands. So it comes off the paper very easily. In other words, it doesn't adhere in the same way that graphite would. So one thing that artists do to combat that problem is to spray what's called a fixative on the paper, and this is described in the chapter. You can see this fixative just looks like a can of spray paint, and that's exactly what it is. It's an aerosol spray, and you would spray that on the surface, and then that would literally fix the material to the page. In other words, if I had sprayed this with fixative, I would not be able to simply wipe it away. That's one solution. Another solution is to use a textured paper, and that texture will help to hold on to the charcoal and sort of hold it into place. There are different versions of charcoal. This one is a compressed charcoal stick. So you can see the difference in the line. It's much crisper. It's also slightly darker. So completely different feel. It originates from the same material, but the way that it's processed, what they do is they add fixatives to it, binders to it, kind of mix it all together, grind it up, and then they compress it into a stick. That makes it easier to hold in the hand and to draw on the paper. But a totally different feel in terms of the style of drawing. Next I have what's called a Conte crayon. Conte crayon is a very versatile material. You can produce a very light line, also a very dark line, all with the same material. So the book kind of describes its versatility. Conte is a brand name, that's the name of a company, but it's a very old French company. They've been making this material for a very long time, and many artists like or prefer this material because it has the feel and the control of a piece of graphite, like a graphite pencil, but it can kind of mimic in some ways the charcoal. So if you could look at this closely, you would see almost no difference between the compressed charcoal line and the Conte crayon line. But you could also, again, draw very lightly with the Conte crayon. So it can just sort of do a lot of different things. The next material I have is ink. And ink is, it's known as a drawing material. Even though using a brush and ink is a lot like painting, think of ink and a pen and making lines with that. It's very much like drawing. So even though an artist would take this ink material, put it onto a brush, and then paint with it on paper, it's a lot like painting, but it's still considered to be drawing. So that's an important sort of distinction to make. You can see how it's running here. It's a very fluid sort of material. Generally it's just one color. So here I'm using red ink, and you can find a black ink, even yellows, blues, greens, just about any color ink you want to find today, you could find it. One thing the book describes is creating what's called a wash. Now if I were to add some water to this ink, it would make it a lighter value, in the same way that I was able to create that with the Conte crayon. So you can achieve a range of values, and there's a really nice drawing in the book by Rembrandt where he was using ink, and you can see that there are dark areas and there are much lighter areas. To achieve that, all he did was simply add some water to the ink and dilute it slightly to achieve those changes in value. Perhaps another form of ink, would be a marker. So if I make a line with the marker, it's just a very dark line, but the book talks about a way to create a change in value using a pen and ink or a marker. Now I can't add water to this to dilute it like I could with the brush and ink, but what I can do is use a technique called cross-hatching. So you have basically what's like a grid, a series of parallel and perpendicular lines. Creating that grid, it's the closeness of the lines in the grid that determine the value. So if I were to add more lines to this, what you can see is that from a distance, when you back away from it, it appears to be a darker value. So the darkness of the mark is not changing. The value of the mark is not changing. It's really the placement of the lines and the number of the lines which create that change in value. So these are just a few examples of the types of drawing material that you could find. You could see that an artist may choose one over another for a specific feel, specific style. A lot of times it comes down to how the material feels in the hand. When it's drawn on the paper, that texture, how it feels, artists would prefer one over another. Make sure you read the chapter in its entirety. Again, it's fairly short. There's some nice examples in there. And at the end of the chapter, there's a section called Contemporary Approaches to Drawing. You'll find examples by 3 different artists. Now these are artists currently living and working today. They're working within the roots of the traditions of drawing, but they're doing things which are really different. They're taking different approaches to traditional drawing. Sometimes the materials are familiar, but they're doing some kind of crazy things. So a lot of artists today are in some ways trying to redefine what is drawing, what is painting, what is sculpture. But I think what you'll find when you study those artists is that they're still connected in some way to the traditions of drawing. So make sure you look at those artists in particular and study the additional content that I've posted related to that.